Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd be the person writing one of these revenge stories, but here we are. 3 years ago, I purchased what I thought would be my peaceful forever home, a charming 3-bedroom with a spacious yard on the edge of a quiet development. As a property attorney who works from home, I needed a space that would offer tranquility and room for a small home office. What I got instead was a crash course in HOA tyranny, even though I wasn't actually in their jurisdiction. Let me set the scene. My property sits in an interesting position. It's technically on the border between two neighborhoods. My house and driveway are clearly outside the boundaries of the nearby HOA community, but a small strip of my backyard borders their development. The previous owner, a sweet elderly woman, never had issues because she maintained good relationships with everyone. I, on the other hand, apparently committed the cardinal sin of not knowing my place from day one. For the first couple of months, everything was peaceful. I spent most of my time settling in, organizing my home office, and getting to know a few neighbors. Most were friendly, though I noticed some of the folks from the adjacent HOA-controlled neighborhood seemed standoffish. No big deal. I wasn't trying to win any popularity contests. About 3 months after moving in, I decided it was time to start some of the renovations I'd been planning. The backyard was my first priority. It was mostly empty space, and I wanted to build a small workshop shed near the back of the property where I could work on woodworking projects. I checked local zoning laws, applied for the proper permits, and even hired a surveyor to make absolutely certain I was building within my property boundaries. Everything was by the book. The trouble started on a Tuesday afternoon. I was on a conference call with a client when someone began pounding on my front door like they were trying to break it down. I excused myself, put the call on hold, and opened the door to find a middle-aged woman with a severe bob haircut and an expression that suggested she'd just smelled something particularly offensive. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to maintain my professional composure despite the interruption. She thrust a piece of paper toward me. "This is a notice of violation. Your unauthorized construction project needs to stop immediately." I glanced at the paper, which was emblazoned with the logo of the nearby neighborhood's HOA. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not part of your HOA." Her eyes narrowed. "All homes in this area are under our jurisdiction. Your backyard shed violates our height restrictions and aesthetic guidelines." "I'm sorry, but that's not correct. My property is outside your HOA boundaries. I verified this with county records." Her face flushed red. "I'm the HOA board president, and I'm telling you that you're in violation. If you don't stop construction immediately, there will be consequences." I remained calm, even as my internal alarm bells were ringing. "I understand your concern, but I've done my due diligence. I have the property deed and survey records that clearly show I'm not in your HOA. I've also obtained all the necessary permits from the county." "We'll see about that," she snapped. "You'll regret not complying." With that, she turned on her heel and marched down my driveway. I closed the door and returned to my call, slightly shaken but not too concerned. As a property attorney, I dealt with boundary disputes and HOA overreach professionally. I knew my rights. What I didn't know was how quickly things would escalate. A week later, I was returning from a grocery run when I spotted 2 police cruisers parked in my driveway. Standing next to them was the HOA president, arms crossed and wearing what I can only describe as a smug smile. My heart sank, but I took a deep breath and approached with my grocery bags in hand. "Good afternoon, officers. Is there something I can help you with?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, we received a call about trespassing and unauthorized construction on HOA property. This lady claims you're building illegally on land that belongs to their association." I glanced at the HOA president, who was practically vibrating with self-satisfaction. "Officers, there's been a misunderstanding. This is my property, purchased legally 3 months ago. I'm not part of any HOA, and I have all the necessary permits for the workshop I'm building." "He's lying," the HOA president interjected. "Our records clearly show this property falls within our boundaries." The officers looked uncomfortable, caught between 2 conflicting stories. "If you'll allow me to put these groceries down, I can show you my property deed and the construction permits," I offered. Inside, I retrieved my carefully organized folder of documents, the one I kept specifically because I'd dealt with similar situations professionally and knew the importance of having paperwork readily available. I returned to the officers and spread out the documents on the hood of my car. "Here's my property deed, which clearly shows the boundaries. Here's the recent survey I had done before beginning construction, and these are my approved permits from the county building department." The officers examined the documents while the HOA president peered over their shoulders, her expression darkening. "These all appear to be in order. one officer said finally. "The property lines shown here do indicate that your home is outside the HOA boundaries, with only a small portion of your backyard bordering their development." "That's impossible," the HOA president sputtered. "All homes in this area are part of our association." "Ma'am," the second officer said gently, "the documents are clear. This property is not within your HOA jurisdiction." She glared at me. "This isn't over. Our attorney will be contacting you." The officers apologized for the disturbance and left, leaving me alone with the HOA president. "I don't know what you're trying to accomplish," I said, keeping my voice level, "but I suggest you check your own records before escalating this further." "You think you're so smart," she hissed. "Nobody gets away with defying our standards. Your little shed is an eyesore that will bring down property values, and I won't stand for it." As she stormed off, I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. I was right. Over the following month, the harassment escalated to levels I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't experienced them firsthand. Every day, I'd find violation notices taped to my door, sometimes multiple times a day. They cited everything from unapproved construction to improper landscaping and even noise violations, despite the fact that I worked quietly from home. Then neighbors from the HOA community started parking their cars in front of my house, sometimes blocking my driveway. When I go out to ask them to move, they'd claim it was public street parking and they could park wherever they wanted. Technically true, but the pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. The real shock came when I received a certified letter claiming I owed $3,500 in HOA fines and back dues. The letter threatened legal action if I didn't pay within 30 days. I wrote a response formally contesting their jurisdiction and demanding they cease all harassment, but that only seemed to intensify their efforts. I installed security cameras around my property, partly for protection and partly to gather evidence. It didn't take long to catch board members trespassing. My cameras recorded the HOA president and two others walking around my backyard with measuring tapes and taking photographs while I was out running errands. Another time, someone identifying himself as an HOA inspector tried to enter my workshop when I was on a video call with a client. The final straw came when I returned from a weekend visiting my parents to find survey stakes placed throughout my yard, stakes that hadn't been there when I left. Someone had attempted to redraw my property boundaries, moving them several feet inward to make it appear that my workshop was encroaching on HOA territory. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by printouts of emails, photographs, and video footage. My professional experience had taught me that the best way to deal with bullies was through careful documentation and decisive legal action. It was time to fight back. First, I filed for a temporary restraining order against the HOA and specifically named the board president and the two board members my cameras had caught trespassing. I included time-stamped footage of their unauthorized entries onto my property. Next, I sent a comprehensive cease and desist letter to each board member, the HOA management company, and their attorney of record. The letter detailed every instance of harassment, trespassing, and false claims, complete with dates, times, and evidence. Then I filed formal complaints with local authorities about harassment and trespassing. The responding officers were the same ones who had been called to my home before, and they remembered the situation. They took my complaints seriously, but I didn't stop there. My legal background gave me tools that the average homeowner might not have. I began researching the HOA registration with the state and discovered they hadn't properly filed certain required documents for nearly 3 years. Their bylaw amendments weren't properly recorded, and their tax filings showed discrepancies. I also discovered something interesting. My property wasn't the only one they were falsely claiming jurisdiction over. There were at least 7 other homes along the boundary that were technically outside the HOA but had been bullied into compliance. Most of these homeowners didn't have the legal background to challenge the HOA and had simply been paying dues and following rules that didn't actually apply to them. I reached out to these homeowners, carefully explaining the situation and offering to share my research. 5 of them agreed to meet at my home one evening. The relief on their faces when I showed them the actual boundary maps was palpable. One elderly gentleman had been paying unnecessary HOA dues for 11 years. Another family had abandoned their plans for a swimming pool because the HOA had denied their request, a request they never needed to make in the first place. We formed an informal coalition and agreed to support each other. 3 of them joined my complaint, adding their own documentation of harassment and false claims. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered. Financial records obtained through official channels revealed that the HOA president had been using association funds to pay for personal landscaping, including an elaborate koi pond in her backyard. Assessment money that should have gone to community maintenance had somehow funded a business trip to a resort in Hawaii that only board members attended. By the time my restraining order hearing arrived, I had assembled a case that was significantly stronger than my initial filing. The judge, an older man with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, listened carefully as I presented evidence of trespassing, harassment, attempted boundary tampering, and fraudulent claims of jurisdiction. The HOA attorney tried to argue that there had been a good faith misunderstanding about property boundaries, but fell silent when I produced the original development plans filed with the county 30 years earlier, clearly showing my property and the others along the boundary as separate from the HOA development. Your Honor, I said, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate attempt to extend their authority beyond legal boundaries. They called police to my home, claiming I was trespassing on my own property. They've harassed me daily for over a month. And perhaps most concerning, they've been doing this to other homeowners for years, collecting dues and enforcing rules without any legal right to do so. The judge turned to the HOA president, who had insisted on being present. Do you have an explanation for why your association placed survey stakes on the complainant's property without permission? We were just verifying the property lines, she insisted. We have reason to believe the survey he provided is incorrect. And what qualifications do you have to make that assessment? The judge asked. I've been HOA president for 7 years. I know our boundaries. That's not a qualification, the judge noted dryly. Did you hire a licensed surveyor? We didn't need to. Yes or no, please. No, but... The judge cut her off with a raised hand and turned back to me. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. The named parties are to remain at least 100 feet from the complainant's property and are prohibited from issuing any further notices, claims, or communications to the complainant or the other affected homeowners who have joined this complaint. But he wasn't finished. Additionally, based on the evidence presented regarding potential financial improprieties, I'm ordering a forensic audit of the HOA financial records for the past 5 years. The court will appoint the auditor, but the costs will be borne by the HOA. The HOA president's face went pale. Your Honor, that's not necessary. We can resolve this amicably. I believe that opportunity has passed, the judge replied. This court takes allegations of financial mismanagement seriously, especially when they involve funds collected from homeowners who appear to have been misled about their obligations. As we left the courtroom, the HOA president tried to approach me, but her attorney physically held her back, whispering urgently in her ear. I caught fragments. Could make it worse. Criminal charges. Step down immediately. The next one is a malicious compliances story. In 1989, I worked for the planogram team for my local Target. We set up, took apart store displays and fixtures, which included product label updates and building out new display models. In Feb, we were assigned 6 weeks of overnight shifts to completely gut and then replace the home goods and furniture, hardware, automotive, and toys departments. Management promised us extra help and plenty of time to take down the huge furniture flats and rebuilds in the home goods, which had heavy display models, and were elevated onto huge precast shelves. Anyone who's ever worked retail knows what I'm referring to. Management did nothing, and our new plans for the displays were to be given to us before we even started, and they were continually late. Toys and hardware automotive were fine. We finished those with no extra help within a day of when they were to be finished. The home good and furniture plans were given to my boss at the start of our shift, along with the deadline of having everything finished in one night, which meant removing the old display models, taking them in tubs to the trash compactor, removing the shelves, along with the industrial carpet that was glued to the shelves, and clean the shelves before they were shipped off to another store, taking apart the furniture for the trash compactor so it would be easier to destroy in the compactor, building the new furniture displays and putting them up on the new furniture flats. We were promised that we'd have 4 to 6 employees help us that night, since a lot of the furniture was heavy bookshelves and desks. We got F all. My supervisor, Dolores, was pissed, and rightly so. We were left with a note to get all of that work done within our allotted shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Conveniently, the GM and other AMs were gone for the night, and no one answered Dolores's calls. Dolores was a big woman, former Army vet, 6 feet, 2 inches tall, and built like a tank. I'd never seen her so angry, or even angry, until that night. There were only 5 of us to do the work of 10, 12 people. I watched Dolores climb up on one of the furniture flats, wait a moment, then while looking straight into the security camera, kicked a fake cherrywood end table off the flat and then jumped down on the flat. It splintered into several pieces. She then proceeded to stomp those pieces into many little pieces. OP, she said. What did it say to do with the old display models? I checked the list. It says to disassemble them and then take the pieces to the compactor so they'll be easier to compact. Dolores gestured to the flats. Team, that's what we're gonna do. So I climbed up and knocked down a 3-shelf particle board bookcase with a fake walnut finish. It fell flat. I then jumped on the back of the case and broke through the particle board back. I then took my hammer and started smashing the sides of the bookcase. It came apart instantly. For the next 45 minutes, we climbed up on each one of those furniture flats, knocked down the displays, and destroyed them all. We had so much fun. It was extremely therapeutic. We then swept up the remains and put them into 2 tubs and left them by the compactor. We did manage to get the old displays down and put the new ones up. We were unable to remove the carpet from the old shelves as it was glued down, and we didn't have any solvents to use. We also left the new displays in their boxes, as there was no time to put them together. Dolores waited until the morning AM showed up and then tore the guy a new one before leaving. When I came to work that night, the new furniture was already put together and up on the new displays. We were also given an apology by the regional manager, who Dolores called that day to let him know we'd been screwed over with an impossible deadine and given a free pizza dinner for our trouble. I left Target 2 months later and moved out of state. Dolores retired 6 months later. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I had a job working warehouse delivery for a store. The entire corporate structure was built on treating the people below you like crap, and that was passed down through every level. Managers would just bark orders and idiot you out for any reason they could think of. They paid about 25 cents over minimum wage, and the bosses drove BMWs and Mercedes. The big boss lived in an $8 million house. Our store was the freight hub for 4 others in the little chain, so we got to know the drivers from the other store as well, as they were always coming to load freight or drop stuff off. One day, we're sitting with 2 drivers from another store, and Buddy remarks that he and his partner are working over 60 hours a week. I say he must be doing okay with all that overtime pay. He says they're not getting OT, just paid a straight time rate. I ask him if he signed an averaging agreement. He says no. He shows me his pay stub, and there it is. His partner comes back and confirms all this, and they've been doing it for months. He'd asked his manager about OT and been told that straight pay was just the way it worked. I tell them that's illegal and urge them to take it to labor relations. They're reluctant to rock the boat, figuring they'll be fired, so I drop it. We never got any overtime. Our warehouse was busy. Our store was not. A couple months later, they're in again, and Buddy's partner tells us he and his girlfriend are moving back east and he's giving his notice. I tell him again to file a complaint. Nothing to lose now. So he does. A few weeks go by, and when I come in one day, there are expensive boss cars parked all along the loading dock. My workmate says something big is going down. All the managers have been summoned and are inside with a bunch of people in suits, so we wander upstairs to see what's going on. The company bookkeeper had an office in our store and handled all the payroll. He was a Chinese immigrant, nice guy. The bosses were trying to pin this on him, saying he didn't speak English very well, which was true, and had obviously screwed everything up. Turns out he was a pretty cagey guy. He knew what they'd told him to do was illegal and was able to produce all the records of him telling them that, and of them telling him to basically just shut up and do it. He hands it all over and quits. I see Buddy, with a new partner, a few weeks later. He's got a pay stub for about 15 paychecks worth of earnings. Company got caught for all the overtime pay and a pretty substantial fine on top of that. Added bonus. The second in command had driven over a nail when he parked his silver BMW on the loading dock and had a flat when he came out of the store. He opened his trunk and called me over and said, "Change that for me." I told him sorry, that's not my job, and if I hurt myself, my compensation claim would be denied. As he went in to call a tow truck, I stood on the loading dock and gazed upon all the havoc I had wrought, and my heart was glad. The next one is an entitled people story. So when we bought the house and moved in 3 years ago, we accepted the location of the mailbox. It's on the other side of our driveway and across some uneven ground, about 50 yards away from the door. This wasn't a problem back then, but since that point we've had a series of bad luck. Wife needed a new knee, I sprained an ankle, and while it's healed enough to walk on and go back to work, anyone who has had one knows that it can take a while before it's back to 100%. So it was decided that the mailbox ought to be moved to the end of our path to the street, straight ahead, on a flat and smooth surface, and only about 30 feet away. We asked the post office what we needed to do to move a mailbox, was told that all we needed to do was let the driver know that it being moved and to just move it, making sure that it's numbered to match the house so there's no confusion. Went to the store to buy a new one since the old one was getting a little ratty from getting hit a couple of times and installed it this weekend. Which, to our amusement, was the best time to install it since we actually caught the driver and were able to tell her that here was the new mailbox and that the other was going away. Great. Situation handled, installation goes well, and now we're on to part 2, the removal of the other mailbox. Here's where my moving the mailbox got political. The old mailbox was on the same post as my neighbor across the street and one house over, so we shared it. During this past election, I posted no signs supporting either of the candidates. My neighbor John, not real name, had a half-dozen signs, flags, and a banner in his yard in support of a certain candidate. John came over as I was removing the old box and complained that the only reason I was doing this was that I didn't support said candidate and this was my petty-ass reason and that I just didn't want to be associated with him. In truth, I didn't want to be associated with him. Largely before we knew he was a supporter, he wasn't a very pleasant person. Walking my dog, he'd yell at me to keep that goddamn mud off of my yard, even though I was on my side of the street. He'd also call animal control on me about my chickens running loose across his yard, when in reality it was his neighbor to his right that had the chickens. I don't have any, although I did buy a used chicken coop since it's also a very nice unit for keeping my wife's Angora rabbits in, so I could see the confusion. We used to wave to him like we'd do for any of our neighbors we'd see outside, and he never waved back, typically just ignoring us and making a point to look at something, anything else other than us. Unless we had the dog, and he'd watch us like a hawk to make sure we didn't come near his lawn. Honestly, we disliked him long before we knew he was a supporter. I explained the medical condition, the walk through uneven ground that I stated above, but that wasn't enough for him. He threatened to call the HOA. We don't have an HOA, we have a neighborhood association that only concerns itself with collecting donations for snow removal and mosquito spraying. I just finished removing the mailbox and went back inside and vowed to ignore him from here on out. The next one is an entitled parent story. Me, M47, and my daughter, F17, live in Canada. There are many outdoor rinks in our area, and we have a favorite one because there are team benches, sturdy boards, it's Zambonied by the city every hour, and it's just generally well kept. You can reserve an hour at a time on this sign-up sheet for $15, but it's free to skate as long as nobody has booked for that time. My daughter plays a very high level of competitive ice hockey, and she often reserves an hour or two and invites many of her teammates to this rink for fun so they can play casually. Around a week ago, my daughter, me, and 4 others from her team are about halfway through our reserved time. This group of boys, 13, 14, YO, that nobody else knows, gets out of a vehicle and approaches the rink, put their skates on, and start skating while passing and shooting pucks and leaving their sticks lying around, all in the way of my daughter's game. I show them the clipboard with the sign-up sheet, which proves my daughter paid for these 2 hours, and calmly ask them to clean up their gear and wait 30 minutes until the schedule is clear again. One kid, EK, looks at me and rolls his eyes while turning his back on me, and his group does not stop getting in our way. I tell the girls to start picking up the stuff the boys keep leaving around the rink and to simply just toss it over the boards onto the mats along the ice. EK, who rolled his eyes earlier, starts complaining, and at this point his dad, EF, and mom, EM, have gotten out of the vehicle and asks what's wrong. The kid smirks at me and then whines to EF and EM that he was trying to play hockey with his friends, but then a bunch of girls came and tried to bother them. I try to show EF and EM the same clipboard, but EF immediately took his kid's side and told me to leave and come back later since he was here first. False. And that girls are too weak and fragile to play with boys. A few minutes later, a worker from the city comes by and shows EF that we in fact are entitled to the rink for the next half hour, regardless of who arrived first since we paid for that specific time. EM suggested going to a different rink, but EF said, "No, I'll get these girls to leave." My daughter skates over and even offers the boys to join her game, so at least they are not in the way of each other, but EF and this kid keep spewing rhetoric about how young girls can't be good at male-dominated sports and how they have it so easy since they don't allow contact in women's hockey and therefore the girls should just go home. But the kid's friends wanted to play, so he begrudgingly agreed, saying things about how easy this is going to be. I sat down on one of the benches, EF and EM sat on the other one. What EF and EK failed to realize, A, these girls are all a part of the same high competitive team, and B, that because women's hockey doesn't use contact, girls have to solely rely on agility and puck control skills, whereas a major skill for men's hockey involves hitting to make plays. I guess this makes me an instigator, but I nudged her and her teammates to go extra hard on them. Me, EF, and EM watched half an hour of my daughter's team absolutely destroy these kids in every aspect of the game. EK started to get really angry and frustrated, and he decided to do something really stupid. The next time my daughter had the puck, EK charged as fast as he could go and attempted to ram her into the boards. Instead, EK ended up slamming knee first into the door. He got up immediately, then started screaming and crying about how it's not fair, and yelling at EF about going home. EM says something about how this is a public rink and we have the right to be here. But the trio left in the car after swearing and yelling towards me. But a few of EK's friends stayed. My daughter's team and the remaining guys ended up splitting equal amounts of each group into 2 teams and kept playing together fine until the next reservation. Apparently this kid and dad duo have a history of getting in the way and complaining about women. Of the guys who stayed, they all mentioned that they are only friends with EK because EF is their house league coach and they don't share the same views about women's hockey. I'm not entirely upset about what happened now that it's in the past. I'm simply baffled that there are still people that think women shouldn't exist in some sports, even if they're male-dominated. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll